since January 18th. I actually did not realize it was that long that he had been held.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. And yes, he's been in for upwards of 11 months now. Pretty soon it will be a year. It is a disgrace when you think about this man's life, the life he has lived, the type of humanitarian that he is, and the fact that he served his country honorably during a time of war. And now he's been held in jail in solitary confinement for the better part of almost a year. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, and so for people who don't know, one of the things that's being used to identify Ryan Nichols, at least in the press, everyone talks about how he was on Ellen before, and he had actually gone and saved dogs and after hurricanes and rising flood water. And then we have, the story that comes out. I wanted to ask you, what are his charges? Because I'm thinking, okay, if you're in jail since, almost for 11 months, that seems like that's something that you would do to an axe murdering serial killer, right? Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of stuff. That and I'm thinking, like, when I first began looking into this, in his case particularly, I honestly thought, oh wow, if he's, if they're holding him, and again, I didn't at the time realize it was since January 18th. I thought it was maybe perhaps recently. If they're holding him this entire time, he had to have done something just absolutely heinous. So what I looked at his charges. Tell me where I'm wrong here. Civil disorder. I don't know what the aiding and abetting charge is about, but obstruction of official proceedings, which I don't think he even got inside to disrupt anything, disorderly and disruptive conduct, and then of course some of those charges are separate as it relates to being on Capitol grounds. So what am I missing in terms of seriousness of charges that justifies being held for 11 months?
There is absolutely no justification under the law or under any type of court precedent for this type of, for this duration of incarceration during this time. In the United States of America, pretrial detention is the exception and liberty is the norm. If you were to take away the fact that this happened on January 6th and look at these charges in a vacuum and then compare and contrast them to Mr. Nichols's personal history, there would be no way under the sun that he would have been held in for this amount of time pre-trial. But because he is a right-leaning conservative American with who's not down with sort of the liberal mainstream media way of life, he has been targeted and he has been improperly and unjustly held for almost a year in jail. It's a violation of his constitutional rights, a violation of his civil rights, and it's wrong.
I mean, that's the thing that just floors me, because it's not like he's a flight risk. I mean, it's not like he's going to go and re-offend with more disorderly conduct. I mean, it's not like he's, an Antifa member out there burning down cities or driving SUVs through parades of people. I mean, this was a guy who showed up on January 6th, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And as I understand, the conditions aren't that great either. Tell me a little bit about that.
The conditions of confinement are nothing short of abysmal. The vast majority of that jail has already been condemned. There is black mold on the walls. There's lack of proper hygiene. There is lack of ventilation. There is lack of sunlight. There is lack of good food, any type of normal food. There's reports of feces and urine in the food, worms in the food, improper medical care, beatings. People are persecuted on a regular basis for the color of their skin. People are persecuted on a regular basis for being involved in the January 6th cohort. If you are a white Republican Christian in that jail, your life is in danger. There is no doubt about it.
Now, tell me about the hours of footage that you have seen, because we've seen like some footage and we've seen some stills. I know that there's cameras all over the Capitol complex, and apparently is something like 14,000 hours of footage or something to that extent. Tell me about what has been released and what hasn't, because I see from court documents, they describe certain things that discussing Ryan, but tell me a little bit about this, because if you had to, give us a percentage of what the public has actually seen from footage, how much of it would you say we've actually seen?
The public has seen less than 5%. There's no doubt about it. And what the public has seen has been selectively, heavily edited video clips so as to contribute to the narrative that January 6ers are mindless drones who blindly support President Trump. They are prone to extremism. They are domestic terrorists and or insurrectionists. This has been artfully and purposefully done between a marriage. On one side, you have the Department of Justice led by Merrick Garland. On the other side, you have the left-leaning mainstream media who are working overtime to poison the jury pool. So by the time that these cases go to trial, the prospective jurors will have been inundated and spoon-fed this narrative, which is false. It is straight up false. So just as recently as this morning, I filed in Ryan Nichols' case a motion asking for multiple videos to be unmasked. The vast majority of the discovery in this case is electronic videos. The vast majority of those videos are subject to a protective order, which hamstrings the defense's ability to advance a counter narrative in the public and to do so in the court at this present time. We are hoping that based on my motion and some other motions, that these protective orders will be dispensed with and that we will be able to counter this false narrative with the truth.
Now, explain one of the charges that he had. I think it was a weapons charge was dropped because one of the narratives that we heard constantly, and I have a whole folder of this saved, where it was reported that these were armed insurrectionists. Everybody was armed. And well, I mean, we know gun laws in Washington, D.C., and they aren't able to actually carry in the Capitol complex unless you have special permission from the Sergeant at Arms or you're a member of the House, et cetera, and you have permissions. But he had a crowbar and a bullhorn. Tell me about the charge that that was dropped, because I find that interesting. That's kind of how blown up that is. Yet it contradicts the narrative that they pushed about how these people were armed with like firearms, and he had a crowbar and a bullhorn. Tell me about that.
Sure. So he's been, in terms of weapons, he's charged with a crowbar, and he's charged with possessing and using an alleged can of OC spray. What I can say is this: he did not buy any OC spray. He did not bring any OC spray with him. There were multiple instances of either agent provocateurs and or undercover government agents in the crowd, either trying to sequester weapons or purposefully distributing weapons in the crowd. We don't know yet. We're investigating. But Ryan was handed a bottle of OC spray from somebody who we believe to be an undercover agent. If that person is in fact an undercover agent, that charge will be defeated. That's entrapment. You can't do that. In terms of him bringing a crowbar, I mean, look, you have a Second Amendment right in this country to defend yourself. If you're not allowed to carry a gun in D.C., and if you are allowed to bring a crowbar, you're allowed to do that under the law. Bringing a crowbar to a protest where you reasonably anticipate that Antifa might show up in black bloc and pound you and beat you like they have done to Trump supporters all over the country doesn't make you an insurrectionist. It makes you an American citizen with forethought, thinking about the danger that you might be walking into and saying, if something does happen, I will have the ability to defend myself. The people on the left may not like that, but that's too bad. The Second Amendment says that you are specifically allowed to carry an item on you for personal defense. They are trying to attack the Second Amendment. They're trying to do away with the Second Amendment, and they are typecasting January 6ers who brought some type of protective device as insurrectionists. Right. That is the furthest thing from the truth.
I think you make an interesting point here, because on one hand, somebody could say, well, if he's bringing a crowbar to a protest, he's going there looking for trouble. But at the same time, this is the same city where we watched Senator Rand Paul almost get beaten in the street by Antifa rioters. I watched an Uber driver have his limo set on fire in 2016 by Antifa rioters. I've watched people exit fundraisers at different hotels and who were beset upon by Antifa rioters. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility to expect that even if you don't think at that particular protest there might be some of that pushback, at some point, considering the nature of things, you will probably meet it if you are there to express your First Amendment rights. And there were a lot of people. At this point, I don't know how anybody wouldn't want to have something to be able to defend themselves. So I think you make a really good point there, a distinction that has not previously, I don't believe, been made elsewhere. And so that's like so one of those charges they're actually trying to maintain, correct?
Yes, they've dispensed with a few of the misdemeanor
weird.
charges. I think that they've dispensed with them just because of the time that he's been in jail. You can only do up to a year in jail on a misdemeanor. They're moving forward with the felony charges. We're going to beat those felony charges at trial. They have to prove every element of each crime charge beyond a reasonable doubt. They're not going to be able to do that here. They're threatening people with decades and decades in jail, people who have no previous experience with the criminal justice system, and they're holding them under egregious circumstances and conditions so as to force an unjustifiable plea from them. About 60% of the guys who are in DC right now, they're veterans. These are people who have gone to war. They love their country. They've been discharged from the military under honorable circumstances. These guys are fighters and these guys are patriots. This is the cohort of people who are just not going to roll over and die because the big bully in the schoolyard says, I'm going to come and get you. These are the people who are going to stand up and punch the bully straight in his face.